All right, everybody, we're going to spend some time looking at a comparison overview. And this is the comparison section that corresponds to the sample that I have in the recommendation report folder. Not the student sample, but the one that I've cobbled together on financing your college education. This video will probably be in two parts. So we'll start this with part one. So in this section, you're going to have some subsections. You're going to look at the solutions itself. So in this section of the report, you'll explain what your two solutions are. And the important word here is explain. You're not comparing anything, you're just explaining what your two solutions are going to be. Then you're going to do the same thing with your second section, which is your comparison criteria. Again, you're not comparing anything, you're just explaining what your comparison criteria are going to be. How will you compare your two solutions? On the basis of what? So you're going to have two criteria, and each of those criteria will have two sub-criteria, and we'll look at those in a moment. Again, you're not comparing anything, you're just explaining what are all the comparison factors that you're going to use to compare your two solutions. So then comes your actual, your criteria. Let's look at all of them. So in mine, I'm comparing funding for college. So I have three types of funding that I'm looking to compare, and then make a suggestion for which one I think is the best option. So my first criterion is ease of application. How easy is it to apply for that type of funding? So just saying one's easy, one's not is not really helpful. What do I mean by ease of application? Well, I want to ask of all three of my funding types, how complex are the forms? Do I need to get extra help to fill these forms out? How much documentation do I actually have to get together? Do I have to make trips to the bank and to the dig stuff, records up that I might have, get my parents' income tax forms? What do I need to do? That's ease of application. My second criterion is cost. And again, I have to explain, what do I mean by cost? What sorts of costs are associated with a 529 savings account or financial aid or loans? Well, I think there are financial costs. How much money do I have to spend in order to get this funding? And I also feel like there's time costs, right? How much time does it take for me to get this funding? Do I have a lot of forms to fill out, etc.? So some of this overlaps for me with the first criterion. And the third criterion, you only need to come up with two. I'm asking for three for one of our activities just so you'll have a spare, but in your paper you only need to do two. You can do more, but you only need two. So my third criterion is, how likely is it I'm going to receive this funding? Right? Can I receive financial aid? Can I receive 529 funding? Can I get a loan? So I want to know what my likelihood is of receiving that funding, and how quickly am I going to find out, because I need to know if the FAFSA or the financial aid takes too long, maybe I should go ahead and get a loan. How fast am I going to find out? Okay, we're going to start this next part of the comparison with the comparison section. So far you've explained what your solutions are and you've explained what criteria you're going to use to compare them. Now we actually have to get to the comparison part. Everything has to be compared on the same basis or you're not making a true comparison. Let's just make sure that you're clear on that. So I've got kind of two broad outlines we're going to look at, just the same information, just arranged differently. And you'll kind of decide once you start writing which one do you think you're going to wind up using. You may do one paragraph one way, one paragraph another. That's fine. So broadly, I'm going to take my 529 savings account and compare it by all of these criteria. I'm going to take financial aid and compare it by the same criteria, loans by the same criteria. Does that make sense? We want to keep everything the same. So whether I do this in one section, one paragraph, maybe 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, or Each one of these might take 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs, so that these are just big sections. It doesn't matter. You use as much space as you need. I'm just going to call them paragraph for simplicity's sake. Okay. So here's how my 3 paragraphs might look. My first paragraph is going to be on 529 savings account. And in that paragraph, I'm going to first look at ease of application. And I'm going to talk about how complex the forms are for the 529 account and how much documentation I need for the 529 account. I'm going to move on to my second criterion, which is the cost of that particular option. I'm going to look at financial costs. I'm going to look at time cost. Third section, or the third part of that paragraph, however it plays out, I'm going to look at how likely I am to receive the funding, how likely I'll receive it, and how much time it's going to take. All right? I could say that this is one paragraph or one section. Then I'm going to move on to my second solution, which was getting financial aid. And again, the same layout. Criterion 1, Criterion 2, Criterion 3, and so forth and so on. I would go through every solution I have and organize things the same way. And this is if you're not generally a person who writes with outlines, this would be one time to do it, so that you make sure that you're comparing all of your solutions in the exact same way. All right, because you're recommending to somebody that they should choose one of these options. You need to show them all of their options. You just may be the recommender. They might still be making the final decision themselves. That's a frequent kind of task that you'll receive on the job. I've been down that road a couple of times, and I could make a recommendation because I did all the digging, but still somebody else above me was going to make the final decision, and it helped if everything was organized very cleanly like this. Okay, let's move on. The second way I could outline, instead of by my solutions, I can organize it by my comparison criteria. So I can organize it by criterion 1, look at all 3 of my funding options, criteria 2, all my funding options, criterion 3, all of my funding options. So again, I have a paragraph breakdown. This is just kind of my general roadmap. But for my paper, then I drill down a little deeper, and again, I start with criterion 1, ease of application. So then my first part of my paragraph may be about the complexity of the forms, and I'm going to look at all 3 accounts. Then the second one will be the amount of documentation I need, and I'll look at all 3 of my saving solutions there. Same thing we did with the first outline, just a different way of organizing. It's all the same materials. My second criterion is the cost. My financial cost, I look at all 3 of my options. My time cost, I look at all 3 of my options. And I finish off with the same one, the same organization for my final criterion. How likely am I to get any of those 3? How quickly will I be notified by any of those 3? And this is a great way to get yourself organized. You won't forget anything this way. It makes research easier. So I just highly recommend you do this before you write your the section of your paper.